Welcome back to the Foundation C# course. We're currently in Module 5. In this lesson, we're going to cover the Wood framework. I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's an acronym that I have designed to help you remember how to step through a planning for a project. Okay, so we're going to walk through what the Wood framework really is. And step one of that is the W, which is you walk through the project. What I mean by that is you take your directives you've been given, your basic requirements, and you kind of just walk through what the application is going to look like. Just real general, off the top, trying to understand the big picture. Understanding the big picture is really important to then diving deep into the details. And the details come in when you open up the requirements. Meaning, whenever you're given requirements on a project, they're not complete. Almost 100% of the time, they're not complete. And the reason why is because we don't think through all the details all the way through to make sure we identify and specify every requirement. Okay? That's not really your boss's job anyway. Your boss's job is to say, I want a calculator. Now, he doesn't think through, or she doesn't think through, do I want a scientific calculator or a basic calculator or, whatever necessarily. And maybe they do, but they don't think through the ideas of, well, what does that mean? What kind of functionality should it have? And get really detailed into the requirements of what this needs to do. That's kind of on you as a developer. When you first walk through the application, understand the big picture, you then have to kind of break it apart and say, okay, what are the true requirements? Start listing what you've been given and then start asking questions about what you're missing. So if you don't know, ask. For example, one of the things that people might not think to say is what type of platform your application needs to run on. Is it desktop application? Is it a web application? Is it a mobile application? Will it be in the future? Because your boss might not know how difficult or easy that is. And again, that might not be their job. They're just asking for, hey, this is what I'd like to have. I'd like to have an application that gathers guest information. That's great. Is it self-service or is it someone can be, verbally giving me information and typing it in that works with the company? All questions you need to ask in the open up the requirements step. Next is the U, user interface design. We still have not, and we won't in this entire process, we have not opened up Visual Studio. This user interface design, my favorite place to go is a notepad. Piece of paper, draw it out by hand. I know there's some really cool tools out there. I know there's some great, graphical programs that make it look like an application, but it's not the application. Here's the deal with that. While you're still trying to set up your file for the first use, I've already drawn out the form on paper because it's really easy to do. And that's the important thing, is it's quick and easy to do. If you find something that you really love, fine, that's fine, but make sure it's fast. Because this process needs to be quick and painless, especially when it comes to throwing away and starting over. Because the more painful it is, the longer it takes you to do the user interface design, the less likely you're going to be to want to throw it away. So if you spent an hour designing this form and getting it right, and your boss comes and looks at it and goes, that's just not what I was thinking. I was thinking something totally different like this. You've wasted an hour's worth of your time. If I sit down with the boss and sketch out a quick 2-minute design, and they go, nope, I flip the next page, I sketch something else out. Yeah, kind of more like that. And they do another sketch. Yep, that's the one what I'm looking for. Well, that took me 5-10 minutes to do. I went through multiple designs until I found what the boss or the client or whoever's asking for this, what they want. Okay, so user interface design, that's really critical. Another part of that, though, is to look back at the requirements and make sure that you can meet those requirements with that design. Again, if you can't put on paper, then you can't develop it. So if you don't have a place to capture a person's phone number on paper, then, and a phone number is a requirement, then your user interface design is not done. You need to make sure you take that into account. The next step, the logic design. So this is where you design big picture. We're not talking about the minutia here, but the big picture of how does this fit together? How do I take the different pieces and make them work together? Do I have to think through things like storing data in a database? Do I have to think through, how the data moves through our system, or how the user goes through from start to finish? And sometimes what I do here is I pull out the user interface design I have in the previous step. I pull that out, those pieces of paper, and I pretend I'm a user. And I say, okay, what screen do I start on? That's always a good question to ask. And you have that screen, and I say, okay, now that I'm on the screen, what am I going to do? And so I physically touch the piece of paper, the button that I've drawn out on the piece of paper. And so, okay, I'm going to click this. What's going to happen? And that's that logic design of saying, okay, well, then this form over here is going to pop up. Or this is what's going to happen behind the scenes. Or whatever it is. And you make sure that flow works the way you expect it to. Because sometimes you find out, well, the user interface design is great. It's really pretty. Every form is, functionally designed well. It doesn't flow well. It doesn't meet the requirements for what the user really wants. Even if it looks good from an aesthetics point of view, even if you think that logically it's broken down correctly, if the user doesn't work through it and it isn't intuitive, then you're not designing a good user interface, or your logic is not correct. So that's where you go back and start over. One of the things that has come out with modern development, especially with phone apps, is it used to be, and I'm going to date myself here, but it used to be when we got software, we'd get a manual as well. So I remember back when we got Office design, and data design. Those are the 5 steps you need to walk through before you start coding. Now, the pro tip for today is planning is how you save time and reduce bugs. Take time up front to plan at every level. That means that we don't just plan one time. So if we build an application and then we come back and say, okay, now we're going to add this one feature. Plan that feature first, and then do it. And really, even though you've planned the whole application up front, we may have to step back and plan out changes. So if we find something's not going to work quite right, plan out that change. Plan out what you're going to do next before you just start writing code. Okay, your homework is to try going through the first 2 steps of the Wood framework. So the walk through it and open up the requirements. So go through the first 2 steps of the Wood framework on the Battleship Lite application. You have the basic requirements already. So now you need to kind of walk through what the application is going to look like. How's it going to work? And then try and figure out what are the extra requirements we need to think through, or what are the extra questions that I have about what we're missing from the requirements. Now, you don't have access to the boss. In this case, I am performing the role of both the boss and the developer. And that's because I'm doing a demo. But when you have questions, typically what you do is you go to the boss and ask. Now, you develop your questions first. Don't go one at a time, because that's just frustrating. But when you have your questions about the requirements you gathered through the open up the requirements step, then you take that to the boss and try and get those questions resolved. And sometimes the answer is, I don't know, pick one. Or I don't know, it's up to you, or whatever. But sometimes you'll get answers like, this is what I want. And it helps the boss understand better how to spell out requirements. Because the boss now knows this is the type of thing they're looking for. And they'll think through that a little bit more next time. It's a little bit of boss training, but the reality is it's also just making sure that you're both on the same page before you move forward. Okay? So try it out. Try steps 1 and 2, the walkthrough and the open up the requirement steps of the framework on our Battleship Lite application. Once you do, come on back for the next lesson.